Just count David
2 seconds. Have you got the mic on?
I have now.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Executive Committee meeting of Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority. My name is David Hopkins. I am the Vice Chairman of the Authority, and this is the first physical meeting of the Executive Committee since the 5th of February 2020. Although members of the public are now allowed to attend and observe in limited numbers, we are continuing to live stream to the Authority's YouTube channel. Following the meeting, a recording will continue to be available on this channel, and it is also being recorded should there be any technical difficulties. To comply with social distancing guidelines, senior officers, including our Chief Fire Officer, Jason Pure, Deputy Chief Fire Officer, Mick Osborne, and our Chief Finance Officer, Mark Hemming, are joining us remotely. Although I have to say, actually, the Chief Fire Officer has actually graced us with his presence and is here live. The others will be joining us remotely via Microsoft Teams. In order to facilitate the best possible experience for those participating in the meeting and watching online, can I please ask those participating in the meeting remotely to switch off your microphone and camera when you're not speaking. You will be audible and visible to all those watching the live feed of the meeting if you do not do so. If you want to speak, please turn on your camera and raise your hand. The first item of business is the election of chairman. I will now ask Graham to ask for nominations for chairman for 2021-22.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. And may I just also begin by apologising to members of the public who may have been waiting for the broadcast to commence at 10 a.m. The delay was due to technical difficulties. Moving on to the business, can I have a nomination, please, for the position of chairman for the year 2021-22?
I would like to nominate Councillor Leslie Clark.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a seconder for that nomination?
I will second that nomination.
Councillor. Are there any other nominations? There being no other seconded nominations, I can confirm that Councillor Clark OBE is duly elected as chairman by silent assent.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and good morning. I will now ask Graham for nominations for vice chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Are there any nominations for the position of vice chairman for the year 21-22?
I'd like to nominate Councillor David Hopkins, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a seconder for that nomination?
I'd be quite happy to nominate that.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other nominations? There being no other seconded nominations, I can confirm that Councillor Hopkins is duly elected as the vice chairman.
Thank you. We're now on to agenda item 3, which is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Yes.
Councillors Hall and Marland.
Thank you. Agenda item 4.
That's the minutes, Chairman, and I'd just like to pick up on a couple of typographical corrections and bring those to members' attention. The first is minute X47, page 10. I'll just draw members' attention to the second paragraph on page 10, the 7th line down, where it refers to a legal challenge was brought by the fire brigade union. That should, of course, be legal challenge was brought. And a further typographical correction in the same minute, X47, this time on page 12. In the third paragraph, the second line down, it refers to a member asked if the authority would be helping members of the pension scheme with pension, and the next word there should be advice rather than advise. Chairman, subject to those typographical amendments, I recommend that the minutes are approved.
Are you happy that I sign the minutes as a correct record with those two amendments?
Agree.
Agenda item 5 is disclosure of interests. Do we have any disclosure of interests or anything to add? No. We then go to matters arising from the previous minutes, which is agenda item 6. And if we look at the minutes. I will invite officers to provide verbal updates on any actions noted in the minutes from the previous meetings. Do we have any updates on page 8? No. On page 9? I think we should perhaps have an update on the Gender Pay Gap Report 2020. And I wonder if Mr. Osborne would like to confirm the submission of the Gender Pay Gap Report 2020 to the government's website. Mr. Osborne?
I don't think
I don't think he's
I don't think he's joining.
Okay, maybe we could have that later. And then the firefighters pension scheme with minutes 47. Mark Hemming, will you confirm that we are giving proper advice to members and also the processes for recruitment? Could you give us an update on that, please?
Yes, Chairman. So in terms of immediate detriment, obviously members made a decision that we would start paying immediate detriment. So we've put all the arrangements in place. We haven't yet had a case that we've had to process just due to timing. I believe we have one which will be due in September, which will be the first one we process. In terms of advice, we are limited in the advice we can give because we're not financial advisors. So we will always advise members to take their own professional advice, but we will of course help them as and when we can and wherever is possible in terms of process and making sure that they do seek the correct advice themselves, and we work closely with our pension administrators to do so.
Mr. Hemming. Those are the updates. We're all happy with those updates. I think the pension advice is very, very pertinent. We do need to ensure that members or our firefighting staff do get properly, advice from financial advisors. Thank you very much. We go on to agenda item 7, which is, do we have any questions?
none, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 8, which is the budget monitoring report. Could I hand over to Asif Hussain, who's the Deputy Director of Finance, please, to take us through this item.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Good morning, members and officers. The report in Appendix A sets out the authority's revenue and capital spend position as at 31st of March 2021, together with the projected outturn position for the financial year. The report in Appendix A is a provisional position pending final audit recommendations and confirmation of any accounting adjustments to go through before final position is reached. We are due for our audit to take place in September and hopeful that it will be completed for November's O&A, where we will present our statement of accounts. The provisional outturn figure for the year is a net underspend of 966k. This represents a 3.08% variance against the budget. It is recommended that 966k be transferred to the revenue contribution to capital reserve in line with the approved medium-term financial plan. If I can now take everyone onto page 17 of your packs, which is table 1. This table shows the budget and provisional outturn for each directorate as at the end of 31st of March 2021. The budget of 31,339k compared to the provisional outturn of 31,202k gives a year-end underspend of 138k. Furthermore, the level of funding is showing a favourable variance of 829k, which has resulted in an overall net underspend of 966k. If I can now take you to page 20 of the packs, which is table 3, an analysis of all our expenditure to COVID-19. After my presentation of this report, my colleague Area Commander Simon Tuffley will provide a presentation detailing on the COVID-19 pandemic support the fire services provided to our community we serve. In terms of COVID funding, over the three tranches, we have received in the region of 800k, of which we have only spent 665k as at 31st of March 2021. The residual balance of 145k has been carried over into 2021-22 financial year and will be utilised this financial year. Moving on to page 21, we have the funding breakdown, which highlight the additional funding we received in year. As you will see from the commentary, majority of that funding does relate to COVID-19, and that's why we are in this position in terms of additional funding. Moving on to page 22 now, we have the capital table, which shows the outturn position for 2020-21. Most of the capital spend has been spent on West Ashland Hub, which was completed in 2020. Other capital spend has been on purchasing new appliances, operational equipment and ICT equipment. There is a slippage request of 472k, which predominantly relates to Red Fleet appliances, where there was a delay in completing them and they are now to be delivered in this financial year, when the final installment will be made. Finally, if I can now take you to page 24, which is table 6 and shows our reserves position, you'll see a small note which states that within our reserves, we are reporting a figure of 586k, which represents this authority's share of the Joint Control Room Renewals Fund. These funds are held by Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service on behalf of Thames Valley Joint Control Room in order to fund the refresh of ICT hardware equipment for the control room as and when necessary. For accounting purposes, we need to report our share of the contributions, but these funds are specifically assigned for the capital refresh of the control room. Before we go on to the recommendations now and hand over to Area Commander Simon Tuffley for his presentation, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hussain. And then Councillor McLean, you did £586,000. Has that question now been answered?
Absolutely. I now take it in the earmark reserves on the capital and will be, as we mentioned, is for the refresh of IT and control centre. Thank you.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if I may, for Asif. Page 18, Asif states that there is nothing relating to firefighters' pensions. New recruitment joining the 2015 scheme, not the 1992 scheme. Now it is confirmed that all active members will transfer to the 2015 scheme on the 1st of April 2022. How much of a saving are we able to realise for the next 2 financial years before any potential increases in revised employer contribution rates are implemented from the 1st of April 2024?
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. In terms of savings, we are currently looking at building the budget for next financial year and have looked at our establishment budget. Based on moving everyone onto the new 2015 scheme and having no one on the 1992 scheme from April 2022, we're looking at savings of around 150k. But you've made a really good point about the valuations, which are due again in April 2024. The likelihood is the employer contributions will increase again, so it will probably be a short-term saving, and we'll have to probably reinvest that into the budget. Just to kind of take you back, the last time we had the valuation done on the employer contributions, they increased by 1.6 million for the authority, of which only 1.2 million was funded by the government, and the residual amount had to be self-funded by ourselves. So that's potentially a clear risk that may arise in a couple of years where we might have to increase our budget in terms of employer contributions. But yes, for 2 years, 150k saving in the region of 150k.
My second question, Chair, if I may, as you observed on page 20 of the pack, it shows that at the end of March, the spend on COVID-related activity amounted to 665k, well, perhaps a little more. Please could you advise members of the latest spend position and any potential future COVID-related expenditure risk, please?
In terms of the COVID expenditure, we're still reporting on the COVID expenditure. There's still a requirement for us to submit monthly returns. So as at the end of June, we'd spent another, I believe it's around 50 to 55k we've spent for the first quarter. So that takes our total spend to circa 715k in total. which will only leave us a residual balance of around circa 90k for the rest of this financial year. In terms of potential risks, I guess the biggest expenditure we've seen is members of staff isolating, and obviously with the current cases increasing now, and we have to wait until August 16 until the rules around isolation are relaxed. I guess the clear risk is of members of staff isolating and us having to cover them with bank. That's where we saw most of our costs come in last year. I guess furthermore down the line, there's talks of possibly booster jabs in terms of the COVID vaccine. Obviously, as members will know, we've supported the mass vaccination program, and again, we may be required to support it again over the winter months. We've only got 90k left in terms of the COVID funding. We weren't given any additional funding for the mass vaccination program, even though we did request it. So that could be a real pressure on our funding side over the next few months.
Thank you. This issue, Chair, of people being pinged, for want of a better word, is something that's going to grow and grow over the next few weeks.
I agree.
He
does. Chief Fire Ask the question.
Not to ask a question, just to give members an overview. I attend the meetings of Buckinghamshire Council and also Milton Keynes Council every week, where we look at about the strategy, about the future vaccination programme, and that's a question that has arisen in terms of the fire services involvement. Members will be aware that we've helped run a number of centres across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. One in Milton Keynes, 2 in High Wycombe, 1 in Aylesbury, and we've been responsible for the management of them vaccination centres since the start of the year. The discussions are going on about the future fire service involvement in terms of what will happen next. Firstly, to ensure that actually we finish off the first vaccination programme and everybody is vaccinated, and the second is the involvement in any booster programmes as we move forward. We are in talks with the health authorities and the local authorities, although no decisions have been made yet. But I anticipate that we will be involved moving forward. And just to make members aware as well, we've offered our facilities for the booster programs. For example, fire stations. An example would be only fire station would be an ideal place if people needed to be vaccinated or booster vaccinated in terms of in the community. So then talks are ongoing. No decisions have been made yet, but as soon as decisions are made about our involvement, we'll bring them back to members.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Christensen, you have a...
Thank you. As ever, I kind of look at these financial updates from a sort of higher level point of view. And I just want to kind of think out loud, if I may, to come to a question, because I actually think this is a very good news story, but there's a bit of twists and turns in it. So the headline figure of 3% under is fantastic in the context of several years of us funding day-to-day operations out of reserves due to the financial constraints on the authority. But then I can't help noticing the amount of one-off funding for COVID that we received in this financial year happens to be almost exactly the same as the amount of the underspend. So if you take that out of future projections, actually it's not a sign of a pattern of now having that spending under control. So I guess my question is, overall though, it does mean that we're actually on budget if you take out that one-off contribution for COVID, despite the fact that we've had COVID costs. So if this is so the question is, how does this impact on our medium-term finances if this is the financial update now? Because I think it looks like we've actually managed to do something quite remarkable in turning the corner and starting to have sustainable medium-term finances. Have I read that correctly?
Okay. If I can just come back to that in terms of that question. Yes, in terms of last financial year, you're right, Councillor, we have obviously shown an underspend. In reality, when you look into the detail of the report, you'll see that there were underspends in salaries and there's been underspends in not being able to recruit throughout this financial year. Now, obviously, due to the impact of COVID and everything else, the likelihood is that we will be looking to recruit and try and operate our full establishment. If I could, I know we're not presenting the MTFP for this financial year, but just to give you an insight in terms of how we set this year's budget of 21-22, we've actually budgeted to use reserves of 1.1 million. So when last year's budgets were set, they didn't have the impact of funding in terms of how the rates have dropped, how the council collection funds have reduced as well. So this doesn't reflect that. So yes, as if you're just looking at as a snapshot, that one financial year looks good, but over the medium-term financial plan, the clear impact of COVID, we're only seeing this financial year and going onwards. And that shows that actually we are still needing additional funding for it to be more sustainable. And as an example, this year we have budgeted 1.1 million use of reserves in order to balance the budget. So over the medium-term financial plans, there are still concerns around finances and how the fire service will be able to fund everything, and that's why we are still lobbying for the flexibility around council tax referendum limits.
Hopkins, do you want to add to that?
No, I think actually that is absolutely spot on. I think we still have some fundamental underlying issues, and I talk with Mark on a regular basis. We met a week or so ago at the hub to look at all the options, and I know the senior management team, I think, met the day before that and actually went through many of the same options. Although I wasn't aware of that until we started having discussions with Mark. So it's something we are very much fundamentally aware of and keep on top of. I wouldn't say COVID has been a blessing. Of course it hasn't been a blessing, but it has distorted the figures for the current year and taken us to a place which maybe isn't completely the reality of our situation. But and I'm not just because they're on the call, both Mark and Asif are of the highest quality in terms of their financial nous, and I remain convinced that if anyone can get on top of it, Mark can, and that we are actually planning for a sustainable, balanced future.
And I think, as Asif actually said, we're looking if we end up with quite a few of our members of staff, firefighters, being pinged, which we know is going to happen, we're going to end up looking at using bank staff, which is going to cost. So yes, it might look on paper really good, but under the water, it's not as rosy as it could be.
Well, I get the impression the government is looking to change the pinging rules so that people won't quite be pinged in such large numbers, and there might be some more sensible criteria around it, but we have to plan for the worst case scenario.
Traditionally known as moving the goalposts.
Indeed, well, couldn't possibly comment.
Yeah, right. So thank you. Any other questions on the bit that Asif's done? So can we go over to Area Commander Simon Tuffley, who will go through the COVID preparedness and response. You will be able to see the slides, but you won't see Area Commander Simon Tuffley.
Oh, we can.
We can imagine.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, councillors. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. And can you see the screen that I'm presenting?
Yes.
And just last question, if I move it forward, can you see the next slide?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're all set to go. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. Thank you for your time today. We've prepared a short presentation to explain how Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service responded to the coronavirus pandemic throughout its various phases, which may serve as a useful background for new members and as a recap for members who have been on this committee for a longer time. So, as a service and as a partner to other services, we had a slight head start in terms of responding to the emerging pandemic when on the 9th of February 2020, an aircraft containing around 150 passengers arrived at RAF Bryce Norton. The passengers were UK nationals arriving from areas affected by the novel coronavirus and were destined, via a police-escorted convoy of coaches, to spend 14 days at Kent's Hill Park Training and Conference Centre in Milton Keynes, which had been repurposed as a temporary isolation and quarantine facility. Looking back 18 months on, this no longer sounds unusual. However, at the time, the matter was particularly sensitive, and we were acutely aware of the need to provide the necessary support and expertise to our health partners to ensure that that operation was a success. So our protection officers visited the site to provide advice and support regarding the change of building use. The site-specific risk information and operational planning elements for the building were reviewed, and arrangements were made for local crew familiarisation in the days building up to the 9th of February. The PDA, which is the predetermined attendance, the number of appliances and officers deployed to the site in the event of an emergency, was enhanced with additional resources and support from our hazardous materials advisors and our level 2 and level 3 incident commanders. Neighbouring services were also informed, and we maintained close contact with the site operators over the 2-week period before it was returned back to its original intended use. So as a team, we learnt a lot from the Kents Hill operation, and it put us on the front foot in terms of our preparedness for the pandemic. So as we moved on, the Pandemic Management Group, which is an internal team of cross-departmental managers, were first stood up in preparation for the repatriation to Milton Keynes. And that group has remained in place throughout the pandemic, which has taken us through 2 stages of response, a brief period of recovery in the summer of 2020, and onto a sustained period of recovery and renewal up to the present day. The group was tasked to manage the internal impacts of the pandemic to ensure the effective delivery of our core functions with a priority for the health, safety and well-being of all our staff. This included provision of appropriate operational and service level guidance, amending day-to-day activities and routines, provision of appropriate additional PPE, and communicating effectively across the organisation. Many of our frontline staff did not have the option to work from home, so it was vital that they had the necessary PPE and working practices in place to keep them safe. Our support staff also rose to the challenges posed by the pandemic, either through maintaining their important roles effectively through alternative working arrangements, or through redeployment to assist in other vital areas. We responded quickly, achieving COVID-secure premises at all of our sites, a continued supply of PPE amidst a global shortage, priority coronavirus testing for all our staff, and a range of comprehensive guidance for our responders to follow. In addition to our core function, we also provided significant support to the coordinated response from the Local Resilience Forum. In the initial phase of the pandemic, this included assistance with the logistics for supply of PPE to frontline workers, delivery of essential items and food packages to vulnerable people, training healthcare staff in the use of additional PPE, and seconding emergency response drivers to South Central Ambulance Service to help drive their ambulances. As the test and trace programme gathered momentum, we also provided support on the ground to follow up on cases where the telephone service had not made contact. And this period cemented our relationship with partner agencies and ensured our collective response was more effective in keeping the public safe. Our internal management of the situation also ensured that staff absence remained low, and we did not experience any outbreaks at any of our sites. As we moved out of the first lockdown, our focus remained on providing appropriate welfare, support and guidance to employees and their families affected by the pandemic, whilst also creating confidence and stability within a new work environment. Our strategic focus was to coordinate a phased recovery of all departments, considering all aspects of the service that had changed during the response phase or need to change in the future. We also used this period to consider the opportunities for improvement and determine what the new normal may look like. For example, how best can we strengthen remote working arrangements and the use of available technology. We also saw it as paramount to consider any financial impacts in the short, medium and longer term, whilst also recognising how this may affect the way we both provide and deliver our services in the future. There was increasing uncertainty in regard to our future council tax and business rate income, and this focused our minds on how any funding shortfalls could be met, both in the short and longer term. We continue to provide coordinated and consistent communications to all our staff, thereby ensuring all areas of the service were fully involved to contribute to the recovery process. We also conducted post-incident debriefing, which involved supporting the Thames Valley Local Resilience Forum process in order to examine the effectiveness of the measures and decisions taken during the response. From the lessons learned, we took the opportunity to update our procedural documentation, including business impact assessments and business continuity plans, whilst also sharing, where appropriate, learning with the other emergency services and the wider sector. Apologies. The second wave and subsequent return to a response focus started in October 2020, when cases started to rise again across the country, and this was perhaps our most challenging time. Our response strategy was refreshed in October with the continued aim of ensuring that during the pandemic, Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes remain the safest places in England to live, work and travel. Our key focus was on providing a safe and supportive workplace for all staff, maintain core functions, extended support to our communities and partners, and effective communication across the service and with our communities. We achieved this through maintaining our COVID-19 secure premises, continuing the adapted staff working arrangements and providing staff welfare and support, whether in or away from the service premises. We refreshed our arrangements for absence reporting and ensured regular access to lateral flow testing and PCR testing, as well as later access to surplus vaccines when they became available. In terms of maintaining our core functions, provision of appropriate PPE, business continuity planning and operational guidance was now well embedded. We continue to operate with an adjusted service delivery across prevention, protection and response through regular risk assessment in order to protect the public and our staff from the impacts of the virus. We maintain continued support to the local resilience forum, professional bodies and our partner agencies, most notably in our extensive effort in providing logistical and managerial support to 4 mass vaccination centres across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. This work commenced during the Christmas week of 2020, and over the coming weeks we helped establish 4 mass vaccination centres across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. We have also continued to support these throughout the programme. The operation resulted in thousands of people within the communities we serve being able to receive their coronavirus vaccinations, and we're very proud to be part of that. We have also continued to assist the test and trace effort and have provided additional extensive logistical support during surge testing initiatives to manage outbreaks in the different coronavirus variants. In terms of effective communication across the service and within our communities, we continue to provide regular updates and briefings to all staff, as well as the necessary reports to the government departments and providing information to our communities, such as the refreshed prevention and protection activities information via social media and our website. So on the 22nd of February 2021, the Prime Minister announced the government's 4-step roadmap back to a more normal life through the careful easing of lockdown restrictions in England, and we're currently poised for the country to move into step 4 with the national easing of restrictions. Our recovery and renewal strategy is designed to ensure an effective approach towards supporting the gradual recovery and transition to a new normality. The framework remains a live document and is treated as guidance to enable a prioritised and safe resumption of activities that have been disrupted by the pandemic, whilst maintaining the ability to respond to further challenges either locally, regionally or nationally. The aims of this strategic framework is to coordinate the response, recovery and renewal activity, considering how it is integrated with other agencies. Our priorities remain to protect the communities we serve, limit the further spread of COVID-19, to ensure the ongoing safety and well-being of our staff, to continue to support the national COVID-19 vaccine and testing programmes in agreement with local partners, to maintain an effective emergency response and continue preparing, training and exercising against foreseeable risks, to protect our communities from fire through a continued coordinated risk-based approach to prevention and protection activities, and to ensure our refreshed and renewed procedures and practices are resilient and enabled by flexible support arrangements, and to ensure we continue to embed lessons identified and shared learning across the sector. So, following a commission by the Home Secretary in the summer of 2020, the Inspectorate announced a national review of the Fire and Rescue Service COVID-19 preparations. And as a service, we received the inspection team for a COVID-19 inspection during November 2020. The results of our COVID-19 inspection were published on the 22nd of January 2021, where the HMICF concluded that Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service responded well during the pandemic and provided additional support to its community. It used whole-time and on-call firefighters to respond to emergencies. Staff supported the service's partners, especially the local ambulance trust, and this meant that people of Buckinghamshire were well supported through the pandemic. It went on to recognise all the additional activities undertaken, which I described previously, and that the service was able to maintain its response, continue prevention activity, and broadly maintain all protection activity. The report states that resources were well managed and the service's financial position was largely unaffected, especially as reserves weren't needed to cover extra costs. The service effectively managed its low level of staff absences and ensured that the Thames Valley Fire Control Service remained effective and COVID secure. It also stated the service communicated well with its staff throughout the pandemic and provided guidance and support on well-being. Extra well-being services were put in place for those at higher risk of COVID-19, including Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff. The service also provided coronavirus testing to staff and their families who were showing symptoms of the virus. The service made sure all staff had the resources they needed to do their jobs effectively, including extra IT and new flexible working arrangements. And it continued to collaborate with its partners and has supported the Thames Valley Local Resilience Forum effectively. Recognising that the arrangements for managing the pandemic may carry on for some time, the HMICERS recommended that Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service should determine how it will adopt the new and innovative ways of working introduced during the pandemic for the longer term to secure lasting improvements, and this is something we are keen to progress. So since our inspection, we have embarked upon a journey of extensive support to our NHS colleagues to establish and maintain effective mass vaccination centres across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. From a standing start during Christmas week last year, we assisted with the implementation of vaccination centres at Stoke Mandeville Stadium, Adams Park Football Club, High Wycombe Town Hall and at Saxon Court in Milton Keynes. By actively contributing to this national effort, we've played a significant part in helping to save thousands of lives. Recognising that we can make a valuable contribution to society beyond our traditional service provision, we are dedicated to the future where we hope to cement these new relationships and seize the opportunities to help wherever appropriate and required. So thank you for listening. I hope this was a useful update and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Tuffley. I don't think members of the public know just what the fire service does, a lot more than just putting fires out. And I'd like to perhaps, with the support from the members at this meeting, put on record our thanks to all the members of the Fire Authority for the work that they've done during COVID and also the work that they do normally. Thank you, that was a really interesting update. Do I have any questions?
Very quickly, I mean, I would endorse entirely what you just said, and our thanks to all the fabulous team from the south to Milton Keynes. It's been absolutely marvellous. Just a couple of things. Maybe Jason might want to comment on this. Has there been a reduction in what I would call business as normal? Because there's been fewer people out on the road, people have been living different lives, etc. Has a reduction in what we would normally be doing, our normal call on emergency services, has enabled us to perform these extraordinary services during the period of the pandemic. And secondly, what are the lessons learned? The officer intimated that we have learnt new ways of working, etc., etc. But I wonder what we're taking from this, because from any adversity does come knowledge and a new insight into how we can do things that we used to do before, perhaps better, more cost effectively, you said with his finance hat on, and more efficiently for the service of the people of Milton Keynes and Buckinghamshire.
Thank you. And in terms of our response, we've actually changed our response. So being involved, an example would be being involved with the vaccination programme. Traditionally, we would have been going out to communities, identifying the most at risk in the communities and giving them community fire safety advice. Because we were involved with the vaccination programme, in the first early stages, what we got was the most at risk in the community coming to the vaccination centres, which enabled us to access them in a different way. They were coming to the vaccination centres, we give fire safety advice, community safety advice, smoke detect, all of that sort of advice. So not only did we help in terms of running the vaccination centres, all of a sudden we had this audience actually that we may not have been able to reach in the past, to reach them in that sense. We continue to work alongside our partners. I think the biggest lesson that we've learned is actually how local authorities, health authorities, etc., can work together during a pandemic, and actually what the fire service can do in terms of playing its part in that. I'm hoping our partners would say that we are a valued partner in the meetings, but we will continue. The lessons learned from me is actually before the COVID pandemic, how far away we really were from our partners. But COVID has brought us together in a way that we would never normally have done before COVID. So there's been a lot of positives. An example would be this weekend in the MK Centre, fire service will be working with Milton Keynes council officers to encourage younger people to go and get their vaccinations. That's something we probably would never have done before, but that's something we'll be doing this weekend, this Saturday. And then that will also enable us to access them people and say, have you thought about fire safety, have you thought about this, have you thought about that, have you thought about road traffic collisions? There's definitely been a reduction in terms of traffic on the road, in terms of road traffic collisions. But what we've done is we've tried to focus our activities in a different way. And that's been wholly positive. And that's the lesson learned. What we wouldn't want to lose is the relationships that we've built up between, for example, the chief executives of the local hospital, the chief executive of SCAS, chief executive of your respective authorities. We wouldn't want to lose that at all. And that's the lesson, that's the biggest lesson I've learned is from that, is actually being involved week in, week out, thinking about how you can make a difference, how you can change in terms of safety in the community. That's the biggest thing.
Thank you.
Councillor Christensen.
Thank you. It's more just a personal comment, I think, that in terms of the work that's undertaken in the Stoke Mandeville hub, grateful for that because I was the recipient of my second vaccine there, but also so fortunate in my capacity as Mayor of Aylesbury to go and thank all the volunteers on behalf of the town for the work that they've done. Jason and I were there. It was a good evening, close to the disco, it's good. But
socially distance disco.
But I have to say, despite being a member of this authority, I had not appreciated how crucial the work of this authority was, and your staff, Jason, in making that hub centre work, both from a command and control point of view, but just the sheer competence of the management, of the management skills of the people who went in there to make it work and make it happen. Yeah, so very appreciative of that, but yeah, we should all recognise it.
I think the logistical skills have been absolutely superb.
Just on that, I think as well, just on that feedback, thank you very much for them comments. I'll relay them back. Thank you. That's one thing that I'm hoping other partners have learned. Because when we were asked to set up the vaccination centres, we applied a very command and control way of doing things. So how we would organise an incident, there are set roles within that you would do every single day. There are set tabards and set colours, tabard colours that you will wear. Everybody is briefed in their teams to do different things. And so what we tried to do with the vaccination centres was to apply a very command and control focus to the delivery of the vaccinations. The feedback that I've had from our NHS partners is that they didn't realise that we could do that sort of thing, them sorts of roles. And I'm hoping if we get to a position of a wash-up in terms of a full debrief, that actually we can carry on that relationship, because I feel as though our officers did that really, really well in terms of briefing, in terms of bringing that approach to what is our objective. Our objective is to get people vaccinated. And that sole focus is the learning point for me. An example would be Adams Park, when the car park was completely covered in snow. Right. What is our focus for that morning? Our focus for that morning is to get as many people who are over 70 through that vaccination centre who are booked on that given day. So we mobilised national assets, national resources to clear that car park completely in conjunction with our partners at Buckinghamshire Council of snow to enable people to get their vaccinations. And on that day, we probably, just by doing that task, that sole task, we probably saved more lives doing that than we've ever done in terms of rescuing people from fires. And that sort of sole focus, I think, is the bit that I've learned from it. But that's what we can bring. This is what we've got to do. This is the focus, and that's what we want to continue with.
I think it's absolutely marvellous and to watch the logistics. Councillor Lambert.
Thank you. It seems there's definitely going to be a theme from this side about that. I had both my vaccinations at Stoke Mandeville, and my first one was in the early days. It just been set up, was just getting going, and Group Commander Dean Elliott welcomed me. He recognised me before I recognised him, which was scary in one respect, but also good in another. And he took me on a quick tour and explained to me how it's all working, how it fitted together, some of their logistical challenges about when the medication packs were open, how long they lasted for, refrigeration techniques, and so forth. And what struck me was, firstly, the speed and professionalism of our service, working with those partners to get up and running so quickly and so methodically, as Anders was pointing out, that it was methodical. The way that it worked was extraordinary, and I'm sure many people didn't realise that actually that's the training of the fire service on dealing with incidents. You have a logical chain of command and a logical set of actions. And then when I went for my second one, I think we're up to 40,000 vaccinations or something like that. 2 pictures, one with the early number and one with the 40,000 afterwards. And Dean was showing me, Group Commander Elliott was showing me the changes they had made, just small, tiny changes to improve the efficiency of the service, the way that it was working. And what surprised me the most was that, it didn't surprise me exactly, but the fact that nobody gave it a second thought that it was working, it was so efficient. And that is a sign of an outstanding project. So for me, hats off to the service entirely, and I just wish that the public could see what was behind it, to see what it actually did and how it did it. Those numbers were extraordinary. Effectively, all of Aylesbury had its vaccination through there. I think that's exceptional.
Probably the same for Wickham.
Yeah.
Others 5 down the town hall. Exceptional. Thank you very. Sorry, Councillor Kane.
Thank you very much. Just to add to what's been said, and I'm totally wish to add my thanks to everything that's been said for the service and what it's done in the past few months. And I think the last point that Steve and Anders are making about the logistical side of it, that I've been volunteering at a non-fire service related site at the Open University, and I've noticed the changes, the little tweaks to the process in the last 4 or 5 months. And whether there's a lessons learned going upwards and saying, well, we learned that there and it's been passed around, that would be really good to think that was happening across the UK. I'm not quite sure it is there, but I'm sure there's some parts of it. And it's just speeded up the throughput in those last few months, so that's very good. So thank you very much to Simon Tucker for his presentation. I've got one negative thing. It's nothing to do with what we as a service are providing. It's to do with the comments from HMICERS, which when I first was reappointed to the Fire Authority a couple of years ago, I made the comment about Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. We've had a change in Buckinghamshire. It's now Buckinghamshire as a county itself. But yet everything's referred to as Buckinghamshire. Buckinghamshire can do what it likes, but I would like to think that we will always refer to Milton Keynes as being part of it, not just because that's the way it's constituted. Because I would have thought someone must have realised that the reconstitution of Buckinghamshire is slightly different than it was before. It's one county now rather than 11 districts surrounded by a county. I don't know how to go about it, but I'd like to think that someone would ask the Home Office to review how we're named. I wouldn't like to spend a lot of money on it, but I do think people would think in Milton Keynes we are Milton Keynes. We're not part of Buckinghamshire. Buckinghamshire is Buckinghamshire now. So that's the only thing I'm negative that I would like to think that we as a fire authority should be saying we are representing 2 unitary authorities now, not one.
Good point.
Wouldn't that require a change of the ceremonial? Because Buckinghamshire, Milton Keynes is still Buckinghamshire. You're still classed as
I totally agree. But if you ask someone where's their fire service from, they'll say it's Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes.
Shorthand is Bucks Fire, isn't it? Because it covers the ceremonial.
I think if we would have this discussion elsewhere, and before we go down that.
I'm not going to enter this political.
What's the Liverpool fire service like?
However, what I will say, I would like to pick up on one point there, Councillor made, is actually the volunteers. We have played a role, the fire service definitely played a role, but what was interesting, and I've visited all the vaccination centres that we've been involved in on a regular basis. The number of volunteers who selflessly gave their time has been amazing, absolutely astounding. And actually, so for example, when we went down to Upton Park, or when you go up to Saxon Court, for example, there are people who are volunteering to do the staff rosters for the day. People who are giving their time, and the people like yourself, Keith, it's just unbelievable in terms of every single thing you've done. And I know for a fact that them vaccination centres could never have run without all of them people putting their hands up and saying, you know what, we're going to commit to helping people in our community. So I take my hats off to all the volunteers who've done an absolutely sterling and a fantastic job. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson to learn. In terms of adversity, we can all pull together. And actually we can produce something which was actually, you know, sort of global, certainly European feat at the time, but it's something that's absolutely astounding and fantastic. So congratulations to all involved as well.
Exactly, and something to be proud of.
Yes. Can I just add to what Jason said? I volunteered because I'm an ambassador for the hospice. The hospice has had a vast reduction in income, as all charities have had. But for each shift that we do there, that charity gets £10 per person. I don't know whether that applies elsewhere in the bigger area that this fire authority covers. Get the word in there. But that's something like £400 a day, and we do 5 days a week. And so that's helping to fill. But we're also, it's World Hospice, the Freemasons are there, Rotary, and as Joe said, someone's managing the shifts across there, so that all that's been done by someone who's paid for by Women's Hospice, but someone's going to do that as a role that wasn't being done until early this year. So I think we are coming together as a community, and it's great spirit there. And I certainly get an uplift when I'm talking to people going to have their vaccination, and getting to talk to some of the staff and how they're working as well. But yeah,
I think the community spirit has certainly been revived, which is really good.
And if we need the boosters, then at least I think we're well placed to get them set up very quickly with using what we've learned to date.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Tuffley, for that. If we could then please go to the recommendations on page 15, and that is one, that the provisional outturn forecast for the authority as at the 31st March 2021 be noted, that the slippage of 0.47, I think that's meant to be K, not million, on the capital programme is approved to be carried forward into 2021-22. That the underspend of 0.966 million is transferred into the revenue contribution to capital reserves. That the delegated authority be given to the Chief Finance Officer to authorise any late changes to the movements in reserves and capital slippage amounts resulting from accounting adjustments needing to be made during the year-end close-down process. And lastly, that should any changes to the amounts referred to above be required, then the Chief Finance Officer will report these to the members at the next available meeting. Are we all happy with those recommendations? Are we agreed?
Agree.
Thank you very much. We now go to the exclusion of the public and press as agenda item 9.
Thank you, Chairman. It is recommended that the public and press representatives be excluded from the meeting by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule A of the Local Government Act 1972, as the minutes contain information relating to the financial or business affairs of a person, including those of the authority, and that on these grounds it is considered that the need to keep the information exempt outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. That's the recommendation, Chairman.
We agreed?
Agreed.